Ethan Walker arrived at the hostel just before sunset, dragging his small suitcase across the worn stone floor. The building was older than he expected, its narrow corridors carrying the faint echoes of footsteps and distant laughter. This was his first time staying in a hostel, and the unfamiliarity made his chest feel tight. He told himself it was only for a few weeks, a temporary arrangement for work, nothing more. Still, the idea of sharing a room with a stranger unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. As he pushed open the door to room 214, he noticed the neatness of the space. Two single beds stood opposite each other, divided by a small window that overlooked the street below. One bed was already occupied with a carefully folded blanket and a backpack resting at its foot. Ethan chose the empty bed and began unpacking, moving slowly, as if delaying the moment he would have to acknowledge the presence of someone else in his private world. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Ryan Walker appeared on the screen. "Did you reach safely?" Ethan typed a short reply, assuring him he had. Their conversations had become like this lately, polite, efficient, stripped of the warmth they once carried. Ryan had been busy with his own life, his own routines, and Ethan had learned not to ask for too much. He slipped the phone away, feeling the familiar ache of being emotionally present yet strangely alone. The door opened again, and this time Ethan looked up. A tall man stepped inside, his expression relaxed, his movements unhurried. "Hey," the man said, offering a small smile. "You must be my roommate." "I'm Lucas Miller." "Ethan," he replied, standing quickly. "Nice to meet you." Lucas placed his jacket on the back of a chair and glanced around the room, as if confirming it was still his. There was an ease about him that immediately softened the space. His voice was calm, his presence grounded, and Ethan felt his own tension ease without understanding why. They exchanged a few polite words about the room, the weather, and how long each of them would be staying. Lucas mentioned he had been at the hostel for a week already and was adjusting to the shared living. Ethan listened carefully, noticing how Lucas maintained eye contact, how he seemed genuinely interested rather than distracted. As the evening deepened, the sounds of the hostel grew quieter. Ethan sat on his bed, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, while Lucas read by the window. The silence between them was comfortable, not forced, and that surprised Ethan. He had expected awkwardness, a need to fill the air with unnecessary words, but none came. Eventually, Lucas broke the silence. "First time staying in a hostel?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah. I didn't think it would feel this strange." Lucas smiled softly. "It takes a day or two. Then it starts to feel normal." The simplicity of the comment lingered with Ethan. Normal. That was something he hadn't felt in a while, even in his own apartment with Ryan. Their relationship had become predictable, almost distant, shaped more by habit than connection. Ethan rarely spoke about that part of his life, yet here, in a shared room with someone he had just met, he felt an unexpected openness. They talked for a while longer, nothing personal, nothing heavy. Lucas spoke about his work, his habit of moving from place to place, never staying long enough to feel trapped. Ethan shared small details about his job, careful not to mention Ryan. Not because he was hiding anything, but because the moment felt fragile, and he didn't want to complicate it. Later, as the lights dimmed and the room settled into quiet, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. Lucas's steady breathing filled the space, a reminder that he was not alone. Instead of discomfort, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. It unsettled him, how easily that calm had arrived. He turned onto his side, his thoughts drifting back to Ryan, to the unanswered questions he had been avoiding for months. For the first time, he wondered if the distance between them was not temporary but a sign of something deeper. As sleep finally approached, Ethan realized that staying in this hostel was already changing him. Not because of the place itself, but because of the quiet presence in the other bed. He didn't know what it meant yet, only that something had shifted, and there was no ignoring it now. Ethan woke to the sound of laughter drifting in from the hostel kitchen. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a pale glow across the room. Lucas was already up, stretching and humming softly as he made his bed. There was a quiet confidence in the way he moved, a sense of ease that made the small room feel less empty. Ethan lingered in bed for a few moments, reluctant to leave the cocoon of half-sleep, but he couldn't ignore the curiosity that had been growing inside him since last night. Over breakfast in the common area, Lucas and Ethan sat side by side, sharing coffee and lightly teasing each other about the hostel's haphazard kitchen rules. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by smiles and the occasional glance that lingered too long. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in months, a feeling both comforting and unsettling. He felt a flicker of guilt thinking about Ryan, who had once been the source of this kind of joy, now absent in both presence and warmth. Back in the room, Ethan unpacked his bag with deliberate slowness, listening as Lucas shared stories about past travels, fleeting friendships, and moments of regret that had shaped him. There was a vulnerability in Lucas's voice, a quiet honesty that invited trust. Ethan responded cautiously at first, revealing small, safe pieces of himself, favorite books, childhood memories, and his tentative dreams for the future. Each exchange chipped away at the walls Ethan had built around his loneliness, leaving him feeling simultaneously exposed and alive. The afternoon passed in shared routines. Lucas brewed tea while Ethan worked on his laptop, the quiet companionship creating a rhythm that felt unexpectedly natural. They talked about music, movies, even mundane details like the quirks of the hostel's heating system. Yet beneath these ordinary exchanges, Ethan sensed something more, an emotional tether forming, subtle but insistent. He noticed how Lucas's eyes would meet his when he spoke, how a smile could linger at the edge of Lucas's lips, and how the space between them seemed charged with unspoken understanding. By evening, Ethan realized he was waiting for Lucas to return from a short errand, his thoughts circling anxiously. When Lucas stepped through the door with a small bag of snacks, the sight of him smiling made Ethan's heart tighten in a way he hadn't anticipated. They shared a quiet dinner on the floor, the conversation drifting into deeper waters, hopes, fears, and the unspoken tensions of past relationships. Lucas asked about Ethan's own life, probing gently into the spaces between words, and Ethan found himself answering more openly than he had with anyone in a long time. A subtle shift had taken place. Ethan recognized it as the beginning of an emotional affair, though he hated to name it aloud. Every shared joke, every lingering glance, and every word of reassurance had been eroding his loyalty to the emotional distance he maintained with Ryan. He knew it was wrong to feel this way, yet he couldn't deny the relief, the exhilaration, of feeling understood. As night settled in, they found themselves talking long past the hour when most of the hostel had gone quiet. Ethan confessed small insecurities he had never voiced before, and Lucas listened with patient attention, offering insights without judgment. For the first time in months, Ethan felt like someone truly saw him, his fears and desires acknowledged without ridicule or distraction. It was intoxicating in a way he hadn't expected, and a part of him feared what it might mean. Eventually, the room fell into stillness. Lucas turned off his reading lamp, leaving only a dim glow from the streetlights outside. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's conversations and stolen smiles. Guilt mingled with excitement, shame mixed with longing. He knew the boundaries he had once believed in were dissolving, replaced by a connection that was electric and fragile. As the hum of the hostel faded into the night, Ethan understood one truth: staying here was no longer just about convenience. It was a collision of loneliness and longing, of unmet needs and quiet temptation. And with Lucas lying quietly across the room, he realized that his heart had already begun to betray him, even if his mind resisted naming it. The night closed in around them, and Ethan felt suspended in a delicate tension, excited, guilty, and painfully aware that this was only the beginning. Morning came with a muted light spilling into the hostel room. Ethan lay awake longer than usual, replaying the previous night's conversations with Lucas. The warmth he had felt was still there, lingering like a soft weight in his chest, but so was the gnawing guilt. He realized that he had crossed a line, not physically, but emotionally, and the knowledge made him feel both exhilarated and deeply uneasy. Lucas stirred, stretching lazily on his bed, and glanced at Ethan. "Morning," he said softly. His voice carried the same calm assurance that had drawn Ethan in from the start. "You look thoughtful." Ethan managed a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking," he murmured. He didn't specify what, fearing that to speak aloud would make the feelings more real, more dangerous. Lucas didn't press, instead sitting on the edge of his bed, sipping from his coffee mug. There was a quiet patience in him, a gentle understanding that made Ethan's inner turmoil harder to ignore. The day passed in a series of small routines, yet the emotional undercurrent between them had shifted. Ethan found himself hyper-aware of Lucas's presence, how he laughed, how he moved, the way his eyes softened when he looked at Ethan. Each moment was a reminder that the emotional intimacy had become undeniable. He tried to focus on work, on trivial hostel chores, but his mind kept returning to the quiet moments that had built a bridge between them. By mid-afternoon, Ethan could no longer ignore the truth. He realized that he had been withholding more than casual stories. He had been hiding his vulnerability from Ryan, his partner of several years. This wasn't just distance, it was a choice he had unconsciously made, and Lucas had become the safe harbor for the parts of him that Ryan no longer reached. The realization left him hollow, yet oddly awake, as though seeing himself clearly for the first time in months. Lucas noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor and tilted his head slightly. "You've been quiet today," he said gently. "Everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, then let out a slow breath. I've been thinking about a lot. About myself. About my relationship." The words felt heavy, almost dangerous to say. Lucas nodded, his expression patient but not intrusive. "I'm not judging you," Lucas said quietly. "I just want you to be honest with yourself." That simple statement cut deeper than Ethan expected. He understood now that his feelings for Lucas weren't simply about companionship, they were about unmet needs, about emotional neglect he had tried to ignore. He knew he had to make a choice: continue the quiet attachment he had built with Lucas, or face the reality of his relationship with Ryan. Later that evening, Ethan approached Lucas as he packed his bag for a short trip outside the city. "Lucas. I need to be honest," he began. "I've been relying on you in ways I shouldn't. I can't let this go further." Lucas looked at him with a soft, understanding smile. "I figured," he said quietly. "I don't want to be the reason you hurt yourself, or anyone else." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. "You have to decide what matters most." Ethan nodded, feeling the gravity of the choice. They sat in silence for a while, two people connected yet aware of the boundaries that could not be crossed. When Lucas left, the room seemed emptier than before, yet the quiet offered clarity rather than despair. That night, Ethan called Ryan. He spoke honestly, about his loneliness, the emotional distance that had grown between them, and the lessons he had learned from the past few days. Ryan listened, surprised but receptive, and the conversation ended not with anger but with understanding, a first step toward rebuilding trust. As Ethan lay in bed, he reflected on everything that had happened. Meeting Lucas had opened his eyes to parts of himself he had neglected, parts that longed for attention and understanding. The experience hadn't destroyed him, nor had it destroyed his relationship. Instead, it had forced him to confront the choices he had been avoiding, to understand the importance of honesty and emotional presence. Sleep finally came, but with it a sense of calm. Ethan knew that life would continue with its challenges, yet he felt equipped to face them with greater awareness. The hostel had changed him, not by leading him astray, but by showing him the truths he had been too afraid to face. And as the night settled over room 214, Ethan realized that some lessons come quietly, in shared smiles, soft words, and the spaces between hearts learning to listen.
The next morning, sunlight poured through the cabin windows, painting the wooden floors in warm gold. Ethan awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the faint ripple of water from the lake. He stretched and glanced toward Lucas's room across the hall, noticing the door slightly ajar. Lucas was already awake, moving around quietly, the hum of a song barely audible. Breakfast was a casual affair, scrambled eggs and toast, with Ethan still feeling the lingering tension from the previous night. Lucas, as usual, moved with effortless ease, pouring coffee and teasing Ethan about burning the toast earlier. "You always overthink things," Lucas said with a grin. "Even breakfast becomes a major operation for you." Ethan offered a small smile, though he couldn't hide the flutter in his chest. Lucas's presence had a way of making ordinary moments feel charged, the smallest gestures carrying weight he wasn't ready to bear. The playful teasing wasn't new, but the undercurrent of attention, the way Lucas lingered just a little too long on certain looks or touches, made everything feel electric. They decided to explore the surrounding woods. Ethan was hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect, but Lucas's easy confidence was contagious. "Come on," Lucas urged. "You'll love it. Fresh air, quiet trails, perfect for a little adventure." As they walked, the tension between them grew in subtle ways. Lucas pointed out interesting trees, the way sunlight fell through the branches, even the sound of leaves rustling under their feet. He would occasionally brush against Ethan's arm or adjust a stray lock of hair, gestures so casual they could be dismissed, but Ethan couldn't. Every contact made him acutely aware of his own heartbeat. They reached a small clearing where the lake came into view again, sunlight dancing across its surface. Lucas leaned on a large rock, glancing at Ethan. "You know," he said, voice low and almost teasing, "you're different when you're relaxed. Funny, quiet, more approachable." Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure whether it was Lucas's words or the way they were said that affected him so profoundly. I don't know," he muttered, averting his gaze. "I'm not usually like this with anyone." Lucas's smile softened. "That's why I like it," he admitted. "You're unpredictable. Makes everything feel interesting." The two spent the next hour skipping stones across the water, laughing, teasing, and sharing small personal anecdotes. Ethan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone else, revealing things he usually kept tucked away, his favorite music, an embarrassing story from school, even the rare moments of loneliness he felt living in a blended family. Lucas listened intently, never interrupting, never judging, only drawing him out with gentle prompts and knowing smiles. As the sun climbed higher, Lucas suggested they take a break. He pulled a blanket from his backpack and spread it on the grass, inviting Ethan to sit beside him. The proximity made Ethan's stomach knot, every brush of his arm against Lucas sending warmth through his body. He wanted to pull away, to remind himself of boundaries, yet he stayed, mesmerized by the easy confidence Lucas exuded, the way he seemed to fill the space effortlessly. "Ethan," Lucas said quietly, leaning back on his hands, "do you ever feel like we're missing something? Or that life is just a series of things we pretend we don't notice?" Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. The question wasn't casual, it carried weight, something deeper, almost confessional. Sometimes, he admitted. "I don't know. I think I notice things I shouldn't sometimes." Lucas's gaze lingered on him. "Me too," he said softly. There was a pause, the kind that stretched long enough to make Ethan painfully aware of the space between them, not physically, but emotionally. It was charged with curiosity, longing, and something he couldn't name. They spoke little after that, each lost in thought as the sun began its slow descent. Ethan noticed the way Lucas's profile caught the light, the subtle way his hand rested near his own, the occasional twitch of a smile that seemed meant for him alone. He tried to focus on the beauty of the lake, the tranquility of the trees, but the undercurrent between them was impossible to ignore. Later, they returned to the cabin, damp and tired, yet strangely elated. Lucas immediately suggested preparing dinner together, turning it into a playful competition. As they chopped vegetables and stirred sauces, Ethan found himself laughing freely, feeling more alive than he had in months. Lucas's presence was intoxicating, but there was also a quiet tension, an awareness that every shared glance or touch carried implications neither dared speak aloud. When night fell again, the cabin felt smaller, warmer, more intimate. Ethan found himself sitting on the porch, the cool air brushing against his skin, thinking about the day. Lucas joined him without a word, sliding onto the bench beside him. There was a closeness that felt natural yet forbidden, the kind that made Ethan's pulse quicken despite his best efforts to remain composed. Lucas didn't speak at first, just leaned back, eyes scanning the lake as if reading its secrets. Then, softly, he said, "You know, I've never felt this connected to anyone before." Not even close. Ethan swallowed, aware of the rapid thrum of his heartbeat. He wanted to respond, to express the swirl of emotions he couldn't yet name, but words failed him. Instead, he simply nodded, allowing the silence to stretch between them, filled with unspoken understanding. For a long time, they watched the water, the moonlight shimmering like fractured glass. Ethan realized, with an undeniable clarity, that he was no longer thinking of Lucas as just a stepbrother. That realization was both thrilling and terrifying. His thoughts were messy, conflicted, yet there was a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Finally, Lucas spoke again, voice low, almost a whisper. "Whatever happens here, let's just see where it goes, okay?" Ethan's stomach twisted. The words were open-ended, charged with promise and danger, hinting at possibilities he wasn't sure he was ready to explore, but couldn't deny he wanted to. He nodded again, though his mind was racing, his heart caught somewhere between anticipation and fear. As they retreated to their separate rooms for the night, Ethan lay awake, thinking about Lucas's words, the touch of his hand during the day, the way his laughter lingered in his ears. He realized that the trip, which had begun as a simple getaway, had already shifted something fundamental. Something unspoken had begun, something neither of them could ignore, and somewhere in the quiet, Ethan understood that nothing would ever be the same again.